Thank you very much, Henry. And it's really my honor to join the CCG again for your annual conference and to be on a panel with such distinguished colleagues. You've asked me a lot of questions. I don't have a lot of time, so let me just make a few comments responding to some of the points you made in the opening and just now. And let me just focus on tariffs for a minute. I mean, my perspective on tariffs through the years is they're easy to impose, but they're really hard to lift. And why are they hard to lift? Because once they're put in place, constituencies develop in countries that want to keep these tariffs. They benefit from the tariffs. So they're very vocal. And we're seeing that in the United States, particularly among NGOs and labor. Second, when it comes to tariffs, particularly the China tariffs, there's a burden, an onus on the administration to show what they've gotten in return if they were going to lift some of these tariffs. And frankly, there hasn't been really any progress on addressing the structural issues that have been identified by the United States with respect to the Chinese market. And China hasn't lifted its tariffs, which haven't helped the United States say, well, if China's lifted them, maybe we should lift ours. And so that's the dilemma, I think, that the administration finds itself in now. It's curious, this debate on tariffs now is public, with senior cabinet officials arguing both sides of the debate. And ultimately, the president will have to make the decision. And just this weekend, he said that he's looking at this issue. So what type of decision could the United States make? Well, there are a number of options. They could just leave things as is. They could decide to roll back certain tariffs, particularly those tariffs that have been a heavy burden on US consumers and businesses during this time of inflation. They could reimpose an exclusion process, a full-scale exclusions process. Or they could even increase rates on some products and decrease rates or eliminate tariffs on other products. And those are the policy options that they have. And my sense is that soon we'll be hearing what their decisions are. I would just urge my Chinese friends, no matter what we do, but particularly if the United States goes ahead and rolls back some tariffs, that China respond in kind, even for its own reasons. But I think that would be a very positive step. And just as the tariff war led to kind of a downward spiral in tariffs, if you're optimistic, maybe we can see kind of an upward spiral, meaning that if the United States were to roll back some, China could roll back some and even more, and then the United States can respond in kind. I see Adam kind of smiling. I'm sure he'll have some comments on this. Before I conclude, I just wanted to make a few comments on the WTO and the recent ministerial conference in Geneva, because I think there are some interesting developments which haven't gotten a lot of attention. And that is, number one, that with respect to the waiver for intellectual property rights for vaccines, the United States and China were able to work together to find a compromise on the issue of whether this waiver would apply to China. I happened to be in Geneva about a month before the ministerial, and I can tell you both sides were really dug in on their position. China was willing to say publicly, we're not going to avail ourselves to the waiver, but for the United States, that wasn't enough legal certainty. And when you look at the agreement that was reached on TRIPS, there is a footnote which suggests very intense negotiations between the US and China, but we were able to find a pragmatic outcome. And I think that's important, not only for the TRIPS waiver, but potentially for other issues that confront the United States and China in the WTO and elsewhere. And particularly with respect to the issue of whether China is a developing country or not for the purposes of the WTO, this TRIPS waiver compromise, I think, can be viewed as perhaps a model going forward. And my final comment on the ministerial and WTO work going forward is that when folks looked at the WTO in recent years, I think a lot of people were blaming US-China trade tensions for the WTO woes and troubles. But in effect, the US-China trade tensions were not front and center last week in Geneva. In fact, the US and China shared common interests with respect to a number of issues, including the customs moratorium on electronic transmissions, as well as response to the pandemic and response to the food crisis. And so as the WTO moves forward and focuses on reform issues, both with respect to WTO governance and issues like e-commerce, climate change and trade, food, pandemic, et cetera, I think there are opportunities in Geneva for the United States and China to work together more closely. Thank you.